Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Work Dad podcast. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on TikTok at workdad.io. Same thing on Instagram, workdad.io, and at work/dad or work-dad, I should say, on YouTube. And really, really happy to bring John Loiacono, known by me and many others as JohnnyL, to the show to talk about what has been a long and really impressive career, largely in the technology industry. And John, I got to call you Johnny. I don't know how to call you John. How are
Oh,
you
good.
doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking.
Where do we find you this fine day?
Well, I've been living in Los Altos here in the west side of Silicon Valley for probably the past 25 or 30 years now. So I've been a Silicon Valley resident. I'm a third generation Silicon Valley resident. So my family grew up here on an orchard.
That's what I was going to ask. So this has been home for a long time then.
Long time. So I talked to a lot of my relatives, and they laugh about what the valley used to be like, and you hear all the stories about yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I'm the one telling my kids about how that used to be an orchard, and that apartment complex, used to be a big open field, and I get to be the old man now.
Well, you mentioned growing up in an orchard. What was your childhood like? What were the things that it sounds like your parents were farmers. Is that accurate?
No, not at all. My mom worked in education. My dad was a custom cabinet maker. Their parents were farmers.
I
So
see.
my mom grew up in central San Jose, by Saratoga Avenue and 280, right in that area. And
Okay.
my dad grew up on Central Road in East Side San Jose, right by the San Jose Giants baseball park. We had an orchard there with apricots and prunes, and I hated it as a kid because every summer I had to go on Saturday and Sunday, had to go work the orchard, and we had to go cut apricots and pick apricots and put them in the dryer and do all the things that you had to do to prepare them to be dried fruit.
What I'm fascinated by this. I won't explore this too deeply, I guess, but I'm curious. uh, You hated it as a kid. How old were you when you were doing this?
So we lived on the orchard, actually, in the front of the orchard until I was about 8. And then we moved to the East Side foothills, and we sold the property when I was about 12, which is now an apartment complex in the front and the back of Los Lagos Golf Course in the back.
Oh my God. What were your days like? Like, what would be a day of going and working on the orchard for you? When would it start? When would it end? What would be involved?
I think my mom got us there probably a little later than my dad went early in the morning, but we'd probably get there at 8 or so o'clock in the morning. And I would either, when I was older, I would go pick fruit. So you carry a ladder and a bucket, and you literally go tree by tree and you pick fruit. Um, and then when I was younger, I would be cutting apricots. So there'd be large tree area over on the side that we'd have 50 people underneath with these large trays that were 8 feet long by about 3.5 feet wide. And we would literally cut apricots in half, take the pits out, and set the apricots face up on these trays. And then the trays would go into what's called the sulfur house, and you'd burn sulfur underneath them to kind of clean out everything and debacterialize them, and then take them out and lay them out on the ground to dry out over in the sunshine.
Did your parents? How did they feel about that work? Did they enjoy it? Did they
Oh
dread
no,
it?
they hated it as well. We used to do it basically to pay the taxes on the property. Um, and this tells you about real estate differences back, and this is probably the late 60s, early 70s. Um, they tried to sell the property for probably 20 years and couldn't sell 10 acres of property in central San Jose.
Wow.
Um, when they finally sold it, it was, I don't know, probably 10,000, 15,000 an acre, which today would be, 100 times that. So
Uh, what do you think the impact for you, looking back at seeing the most tangible, hands-on kind of work you can probably do? How did that impact what you wanted to do with your life growing up? Like when you reflect on, a career we'll talk about in a second, largely in what is pretty intangible work in the tech sector. How do you think that shapes anything that determined where you were going to spend your time as you created your professional life?
Kind of two extremes. I think when I was younger, it was why it was so important to get an education, to not go into quote farming, like that
Hmm.
was something bad. But my parents grew up, as people that worked in the agriculture industry. At least their parents did, and they were working to get out of that. They wanted the kids to go to college, so it was really driving me to go get an education, or driving them to drive me to go get an education. One, but on the other side, I think it also instilled in me a work ethic, and that's something that, at the end of the day, I see I see a spectrum today, and in a lot of the youth coming into the workforce, about willingness to work hard. And there's some that are
Hmm.
just, they work like dogs, and there's others that are more in it for other purposes, to get a check and do something else with it. So it's happy medium somewhere in between there. I've learned a lot from my kids over the years about work life balance. But looking back on those days, it instilled in me, certainly, a strong work ethic and what it takes to get something done.
So, what did little Johnny L want to be when he grew up?
Let's see, an astronaut, a baseball player, all the traditional stuff. Um, didn't have any. I can't remember like what profession I wanted, other than the typical little kid stuff. I do know that when I got into college, coming out of the Silicon Valley, and the Silicon Valley really was born in kind of the '60s, so I experienced it from afar. I was nowhere near it. My parents were not involved in technology whatsoever. But living around it and hearing so much about it, and having friends and friends' parents and dads and families, and moms involved in it, that drove me to want to get into technology when I was in school, not knowing what I would do. I didn't necessarily want to become an engineer, although looking back, it's one of the things I wish I would have done. But where I'm at now, or thinking back on it, really wanting to get into technology, but not having any idea how or where to jump into that.
What makes you wish that you had gotten into engineering?
I just enjoy the technical side. It's funny. My wife is a has a software engineering degree, and I have a marketing slash business degree. And funny that she now works in marketing and communications, and then I went on the side, on the technology side, of actually driving engineering organizations and large technology companies. And so we kind of reversed kind of careers as we went down the path. But I really enjoy the technical side. Not that I was ever trained in it. I don't claim to be an engineer by any stretch, but really diving into the technical side of understanding how things work and how things operate. That to me was the real fun part.
So, folks that are listening won't. Not everyone will know this. The way you and I know each other is you had some time at Adobe. You spent, I think, 5 years there, in kind of the mid 2006, 2011. I think was your time there, and ran the digital media organization, which included Creative Suite and the overall creative business, which was Adobe's largest business and continues to be. Uh, I don't know as much about your how you got there. I'd love to kind of hear, you know, coming out of school, what were you? Did you roll right into a job? Did you know exactly what you wanted? How did that go, and how did it go from there?
Yeah, so I graduated from Fresno State in Central California, business degree, and a communications degree. I had two degrees. Um, and I got out of school and I started working at National Semiconductor in the communications department there in marketing. And out of school, worked there for probably just under 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, doing a variety of entry level roles. And then I got an opportunity to go to Sun Microsystems. And it was still relatively a startup. It had just gone public, I think the year before, and I got there in 86 or 87. I can't remember now. And I had just the best professional experience at Sun Microsystems. I went from an entry level person in the communications. Um, it was a place I learned how valuable sales actually is. And everywhere else, sales was kind of looked down upon, and at Sun, it was kind of elevated to be, and they were the technology of technology companies. They were a bunch of geeks, a bunch of brilliant masterminds of all levels of technology, both software and hardware, and experiencing that, they still valued sales, because at the end of the day, you could have the best widget in the planet, but if you can't actually get someone to write you a check for it, it kind of doesn't matter. And so I left marketing and went into sales for 2 or 3 years, and carried a bag and sold. And it was the hardest transition I've ever made, because I had no idea how to sell. I had never sold a French fry in my life. And that experience really taught me what it's like and how to value someone who understands what it's like to sit in front of the customer, have the customer either complain or give you feedback or input about how valuable or invaluable your product is, and then ultimately to convince them to write you a check for the value for your services or product. That was just incredible experience. And that experience, then, when I went back into corporate, I took a more senior marketing role, and they really valued the fact that they would come and go, "Oh, you've been in front of customers. What do they say about this? What do they think?" Because it's strange just how far you are removed from a customer when you work in an organization that's, of 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 people. And I remember I instilled a practice there. One little thing I did, it's a side story, is I said, okay, in order to get your review at the end of the year, and at that time, I think I had 5,500 people when I was running software for Sun. I said, in order for you to get your review, you have to, one of your checkbox things you have to do is you have to have 2 direct exchanges with customers, meaning you have to be in front of a customer twice a year. And it could be an hour meeting, a 2-hour meeting. You could do it in the background of a sales meeting. You could do it as a customer call. You could, any variety of things you could do, but everyone had to do it, include all the way down to an admin. I didn't care what level it was. If you were in the 5,000 person organization, you had to go do this. And I got so much pushback from people saying, "Hey, I'm a software engineer in the background. I'm doing code. What do I need to see what the customer's like?" And I said, "Did you hear what you just said?" I mean, it's amazing how so many people just think that they don't need to know what a customer thinks about their product or
Mhm.
service. And so anyway, we put this in practice, and it got a lot of pushback, but finally convinced HR to let me do it. And it was, to me, it was just an important thing to actually instill in every single employee. And so that sales experience stays with me even today, about how important it is to have everyone in the organization understand that you work for the customer at the end of the day.
Yeah, that resonates. As someone who started my career in tech support, answering phone calls and talking to a lot of customers and hearing all the complaints, it certainly was a huge it played a huge role in shaping my perspective on how to build product and how to relate
Mhm.
to people, and the user. If you could rewind a little bit, so you were in marketing and you made the decision to go into sales. Sales has, I don't know if it always has, but I think it has a stigma around it. The type of people that do it, the type of work it requires you to do, the kind of person you have to be to be successful in it. One, what kind of turned you to explore that job, that type of job? And two, related to that, can you remember what were the attributes or characteristics or criteria you were using at that time to determine what to do with your career? Like, was it purely financial? Was it something you could learn? What were the things that were helping you make decisions about your career back then?
A lot of it is just through osmosis, what rubs off, and working in a large organization, seeing how it works, seeing people who around you who are successful, what have they gone, what's been in their background. One of the things that Sun instilled that I just loved was, they very much supported mentor programs. And so what I did was, my philosophy was always have a minimum of 3 mentors. Don't just have one, because you'll get one perspective. What you want is someone who's like in your field, who knows what you're doing, knows your job, and can give you input there. Have someone who's the senior most person you can find, who can give you kind of a broad perspective, and then get someone out of your industry, out of your company, so that you really get an outside perspective, so someone can look at things with fresh eyes. So having kind of that idea, I picked mentors in those areas. And again, they were very much instilling in me, yeah, sales experience is really important to understand truly what a customer is thinking and believing, liking and not liking. So that was kind of what shaped a lot of what I was doing.
As it's fascinating to hear you say you had 3 mentors, or you always tried to have 3. Most people I know have struggled to find one. How did you go about recruiting 3 mentors?
The most difficult one was the most senior guy I got, who at that time I was a junior person in the organization, and this guy was uh, I don't think he was an executive VP. He was a vice president in a large organization. And one day, I just kind of badgered him, right? And I just kept coming back to him saying, "Hey, really, people love to talk about themselves, right? At the end of the day, most people do." And if you get them going about something that they are passionate about or like, so what I did is just tapped into that, and I would go to these people and I would say, "Hey, I just want to learn about your experience. I don't want to talk about me at all. I want to talk about you, how you got to where you're at, etc." And I go, and I don't want to burden you, because you say mentor program, but people go, "Oh God, you're gonna make me do all." How about if I meet you for coffee? Or how about if I bring you coffee in the morning? Can I drop by your office and get you a cup of coffee? I'll bring it by 15 minutes. If I'm not at your office in 15 minutes, you never have to talk to me again. Just something where I could lure them into, I'll buy you lunch in the cafeteria. You got to eat lunch every day. How about if I just meet you there? We'll have lunch one day. And then after one meeting, I would go, well, hey, if you don't have any time, that's okay. No, 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 no. I'd be okay to meet again. Usually they're into, okay, you're just going to talk about me. You're really not going to, badger me about lifestyle and everything else. Sure. I'd love to talk to you about that. So it was very successful in taking that approach.
That's good advice. The art of the small ask, as some folks would call it. And so now you've done sales, and you said you kind of jumped back into corporate. Where you climbed the ladder pretty high at Sun? I think you ended up becoming an executive vice president. How did that unfurl?
Well, part of it is my last title there was the EVP of software, and I started literally as a low level, not mailroom, but pretty close to mailroom level job. And so one of the things I tell people is the fact that Sun was able to invest in me, and people like Scott McNeely and people like my key mentor was a guy named Ed Zander, who was the president there, um, really tells why I stayed there. Because if someone's, you're not being recognized for what you're doing, either financially or from a title perspective, or the types of work that they give you, the challenge work they give you, all those things, they let me go from the marketing path and get promoted a few times. And then they let me just change careers and go from a path to be my next job would have been probably director in marketing to actually move out into sales. And I took a demotion. I went from, I think, 3 levels from the CEO to 7 levels from the CEO in that job. And then that landed me a job to come back in and get another level of promotion above that, and then really have the chance to go much, much broader. So the fact that Sun actually allowed me to go do these different things was motivating to me, and it kept me there. I mean, other job opportunities came around over the years. I'll tell you a story maybe later on about an interview with Steve Jobs that was the most fascinating experience I've ever had. But all that said, the fact that Sun was able to invest in me over time and keep promoting me and giving me more challenging work to do and different work to do is why I stayed there. And that path was going from marketing, low level marketing, into sales, back into marketing, becoming vice president of brand marketing, becoming the CMO of the company, chief marketing officer. And then from CMO, my mentor left, and everybody goes, "Oh, his avenue to the senior management team left." And another guy took over and basically said, "Hey, do you want to take over a division in the software organization running the operating system?" And if you know operating system and you know operating system personnel, their poop doesn't stink, right? They're the best of the best, and they're kernel engineers, and they're like the epitome of software engineering as far as what they think, anyway. So it was a very difficult thing to step in from being the marketing guy, or the suit, as they
Hmm.
called me, to going into running the geekiest geek software engineers in the company. That was a challenge. That was quite fun. And so, in essence, doing that let me again do something very different from a career perspective. And then my boss became the CEO of the company, and I was promoted to run all software. So that was my at least my stint at Sun.
So that was the 19 years at Sun, and uh, I'm curious at in current day,
Mhm.
there's a bit of a stigma in tech now. If you stick at one company for a long time, you have to convince people that you aren't just, stagnant or,
Well, then
not a
you have
dynamic.
Polaroids on some of the executives. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious if that was a stigma back then, or if that was something you ever thought about. Do I need to do I need to leave in order to have a more full career, or was it just the fact that you had these opportunities that you mentioned keep coming up and keeping you fulfilled that made it an easy decision to stick in one place?
I think mostly it's the latter, because I had probably had, I would say there was probably three times in that 19 years, three or four times, when I took an interview outside and there was something that was really fascinating, either a startup company or a really fascinating area, or someone like Apple had called when they were just trying to reemerge after they had kind of gone through the struggles. Um, those are all things that enticed me at least to go out and kind of investigate. But in each case, Sun came back with something bigger or different or more challenging, as a lure to keep me there. And I give them credit, and to this day, I saw that philosophy of, if your people are interested in what they're doing, they're going to stick around. It's, when people leave companies, they always say, well, they'll go in the exit interview, and say, well, it's not you, Brian. It's really not. It's not you. It's really the company and their process. No, at the end of the day, it's about people. And if you don't like
Mhm.
the people you work around and work for, you're going to leave.
So tell us, you teased us about this Steve Jobs interview. It sounds like this happened during your time at Sun. What was the story?
Yeah, so I've been at Sun for quite a while. I think I was a director level. I might have been vice president by that time. I don't remember. The funniest story. So I'm at home on a weekend. I'm working in my office, and my wife walks in and goes, "Hey, there's a Steve Jobs on the phone for you." It's on a Saturday, and I'm like, one of my buddies has called me up and said he's Steve Jobs. So I pick up the phone and I do the typical, "Hi, Steve, how's it going?" And this woman goes, "Hello, this is, whatever, Beth Jones. I'm the administrator for Mr. Jobs, and he'd like to speak with you. Do you have a minute?" And I'm like, wow, like someone's wife. He got someone's wife to cut on the phone to play at. That's okay. So click. 5 seconds later, "Hey, this is Steve. How you doing, John?" Gosh, it sounds like his voice, actually. So I start this conversation. He basically says, "Hey, I got this job opportunity coming inside. I'd like to have you come in and meet with me. Are you willing to come in?" Uh, okay. So he goes, "Well, I'll put Wendy back on the phone, and we'll get it set up, and I'll see you in the next couple of weeks." Okay, great. She gets back on the phone. I make an appointment. My wife goes, "Who was that?" And I go, "Well, I think it was Steve Jobs. I'm not exactly sure." So sure enough, I get the email confirmation, and I go for the interview. So a couple weeks later, I tell my boss about it. I tell the president. I said, "Hey, look, I'm going to go interview with this guy." And he goes, "Oh, you got to go. You got to go meet Steve Jobs." So I go to the interview, and I'm upstairs, and this is when they were in Cupertino still. Um, and I'm on the third floor outside his office, and he's like 20 minutes late, 30 minutes late. And he comes flying out, and he's in Steve Jobs, uniform, which is hiking boots, jeans, black crew neck shirt. "Come with me." And we start talking for a little bit, and he goes, "Come in." We walk outside, and we go out on the balcony on the third floor. And he's looking out, and he's starting to see, yeah, and he just starts blabbering. I mean, he's just the master marketeer, and he just starts selling about, this is where the brilliance exists, this is where the magic happens, and he's just going on and on and on. And the whole time, as a marketer, I'm looking at the guy going, wow, he's as thick as they say he is. This isn't this. I'm not listening to what he's saying. I'm looking at the presentation about how he's saying it. And after about 20 minutes of this, and he kind of goes, "This is technology mecca right here. This is where everyone comes. This is where all the creativity happens. And come with me." And he whisked me back and said, "I want to show you something." And this is right when the Apple Store was going online for the first time, and it wasn't public yet. So he goes, "Come here, I want to show you something." He brings it to the computer, and he goes, "What's it down?" He logs, and he goes, this is the Apple Store, and look, you can do this, and you can actually buy, you can use your credit card right on the, and this is very new to the industry at that time. And he goes on and on and on, and all of a sudden, this is where he comes, Steve Jobs. He's working, and I was like, oh, what's that? And he starts looking at the screen. And all of a sudden, he starts debugging a problem in the interface. And I'm like, okay, and I'm literally right next to him. And he goes on, it seems like probably for 5 or 7 minutes, just staring at the screen. No, that shouldn't happen. No, that should. Let me go check the code. And he's gone. So I'm just sitting there for 7 minutes doing nothing. He goes, and then after this time, he goes, oh, click. He goes, well, I'll have to file it as a bug. Okay, so do you want the job? And I went, what's the job? I don't even, you haven't said anything about what the job is. Well, and then he gives me like maybe 3 minutes on what the job entails. And I go, well, I'll get back to you. Let me talk to my wife, and I'll get back to you within the next day or two. Okay, great. Thanks. Bye. Boom. And I walk out, and I was like, okay, that was just surreal. As it turns out, I went back. My boss said, how'd it go? I told him what happened. He walked in my office the next day with a piece of paper with the promotion. That might have been the vice president promotion. And I stayed there for the next, 10 years. So that was, it's pretty wild.
It sounds like Steve Jobs. I've definitely had my own Steve Jobs moments, and can imagine the exact experience you're talking about. Did the couple things that stand out to me about that story, though. So one, you told your boss you were going to go interview with Steve Jobs. Was that a natural thing to do? Did you have to think twice about that at all?
I wouldn't, like, if someone said, should I tell my boss? I think it would depend on the circumstance. I had an extremely close relationship with my boss. He was my mentor. I was a couple levels below him. Actually, he wasn't even my direct boss. He was my boss's boss at the time. And I felt comfortable enough to tell him that. I put it this way. I felt comfortable. I felt close enough to him that if I hadn't told him and he found out through, oh, I took a job offer from Steve Jobs, or found out later, I would have felt way worse than telling him up front that I was going to do it. So I felt close enough to him. Now, some people may not have a great relationship with their boss. It may not be a wise thing to do. It depends on the circumstance.
So another piece is that you ended up with a promotion where you were. Do you believe that you would have been promoted had you not taken this interview in the same time frame?
Great question. Probably yes, but not in the same time frame. I think this accelerated whatever might have happened down the road, and I don't know what that time frame would have been.
All right, and then you ended up not taking this job. Did you have any regrets about the decision you made?
Did I have regrets? It's interesting because, like a lot of things, and you've had Apple or Steve Jobs experiences. I have a lot of friends who worked at Sun, who went to work at Apple over time, who worked close or around Steve, and it's kind of a hit or miss scenario. Whereas if you're in the inner circle, it's Fat City, because you're going to be great, but you could get your head chewed off at any moment. If you're not in the inner circle, you kind of don't matter. So didn't care as much about the people that weren't in his inner circle. So you could be collateral damage if he was moving on to do something else. So again, I look back, would have been fun to work around him. And I think to this day, I still believe Steve Jobs has been the most prominent high-tech executive, marketer / sales / engineering personality that the industry has ever seen. Almost by far. I mean, I don't think anybody else is close. And I still think he's been the most influential as well. And so I think he would have been fascinating to work around. Where if I would have been 2 steps removed or something, or not in the inner circle, then it probably wouldn't have been as fun. So outside in, it would have been great. If I was there, it probably wouldn't have been as exciting as I thought it might have been, based on everything I've heard anyway.
Yeah, I'm curious, Johnny, with what I recall. What rough year are we talking about?
Like, is this... I would say probably it's in the 90s.
Okay.
So probably late 90s.
Late 90s, yeah. So this is probably after Next or when he was coming back to
He had come
Apple.
back. He'd come back from
Yeah.
Next. So
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
an interesting encounter with he was at Next as well with him. So well, that's another story though.
We'll see if we get to that. So I'm asking time frame because there was there was definitely a reputation that you're kind of referring to about what it was like to work at Apple. There's a
Mhm.
reputation of what it was like to work at Microsoft and Bill Gates at the time, and companies develop reputations. Right now, Amazon has a reputation, and all these companies have reputations. And there's an implicit decision you have to make about your priorities when deciding about whether you're going to work there. You're deciding about, okay, well, I could make this much money on stock, or I could make this much money because I'm going to get, a great compensation package. It can be that in exchange for that, I'm going to have to deal with potentially a really harsh work environment, toxic work environment. It might mean that the hours are completely crazy and I have to make sacrifices in my personal life or other things. Did that factor in at the time? It sounds like it did, that your priorities didn't necessarily make this the clear winning job to take.
That's a fascinating point, Brian. I think underneath that, forgetting my situation. I think there's
Mhm.
a something I would share with a lot of young people, which is, work life balance is an important thing, and I've learned a lot from people way younger than me, my kids' age, about work life balance. That's been, I think, beneficial for me to kind of step back from the grind of work. I think we all understand that there's times your career has ebbs and flows. I'm working more hard than I want to work for the rest of my life, but I'm doing this to set up my next move. That's a common thing that happens. The challenge with that is it's a lure, right? Which is, oh, I'm going to work harder now, and I'm going to not be as home as much now, and I'm going to work later hours now because then I'll get that promotion, and then I'll be fat city, then I'll be great, and then I can really, well, then you get that job, and there's just more pressure and more accountability and more expectation. And then that leads to, well, yeah, but I'm doing really well at that. I can do the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing. And so it just is a spiral that sucks you in. And then you find yourself, now I'm 50 years old. I don't know who my kids are. I don't know who my friends are. I'm strained with my spouse. All these things add up and they come back to haunt you. So what I've learned in my only this much of wisdom I can share with people is that, just be very careful that when you say I'm gonna accelerate now and over, emphasize my career now, and I have to pull away from other things now, but I'll come back to it later. That coming back later is the real hard part, because it draws you in, and that title or that promotion or that, salary increase and the expectation that goes with that, can be devastating.
Well, it sounds like you had to you learned a little bit more about work-life balance later on, in your career. Seems to imply that maybe during this part, you were all in. You talked about work ethic and, growing up, working at the orchard and how hard you kind of poured yourself into this stuff. Uh, was that kind of your mindset at the time? Was just, all in on work? And if so, or if not, were there sacrifices that you were making that you look back on and you wonder about, whether it was in your personal life or, social life or mental health or physical health or anything like that that stands out?
I think the only thing that, I probably, let's look back. I might have oversteered on the work side. What I never, sacrificed was family. So friends and extended things and exotic travel, or big those are all things that, may have taken a setback. I may have been set back a little bit. But one thing I never sacrificed was family. So I was at all my kids' games, or 95% of my kids' games. I coached some sports, um, heavily involved in a lot of my kids and my wife's and her school activity things. So those are things where I felt like I was going to put a stake in the ground on those things. Um, Looking back, what I've done, I would have done even more, I think, on the friend side, and then would have done things more outside of just my family and extended family. But yeah, it did sway some of my decisions. I think the jobs, not wanting to work for Steve, but working for people that I knew and could trust. Those are things that influenced some of my decisions in those days.
Yeah, part of the reason I'm poking on that is I just find this to be there's this myth of that you can have everything and you don't have to make any sacrifice at any time, or that everything's one way. And I do believe, like in my experience, at least looking at an opportunity in like Apple and Steve Jobs, is I didn't get the feeling that there was really an appetite for balance or for protecting any part of your life. If there was something that the company needed from you in order for it to do what it needed to do, you were expected to do it, period. And so working at a place where there isn't protection or there isn't respect for that kind of setting of boundaries has definitely played a role in my career in choosing where I was going to work and how I was going to work. And it sounds like maybe not explicitly, but it sounds like implicitly that played a role for you as well.
No doubt. I think you've really you've articulated exactly what the scenario is for 90% of work environments, which is they will, by design, draw as much out of you as they possibly can. And if you let them, if you allow it to happen, they'll suck you entirely in, and you could have no life because you could work literally 7 by 24. I remember guys falling asleep with laptops on their laps with food on it because they were eating dinner in a hotel room, at midnight, fell asleep, and then were at work the next morning at 7 o'clock. You know, going through the whole scenario again, and if you allow that to happen, it can. Now, that's to say that every company's out there to go suck you dry. There's companies who are very much into understanding, hey, look, we need to make sure that when we give you time off, you got to take time off, because otherwise, yeah, that work, you're going to burn out. My boss, I remember him telling me, he said, I'm a work hard, play hard guy. And this is one of the things that stuck with me, which is when I'm here, I'm going to work and I'm going to work really hard. But when I'm away, I want to be away. Turn the phone off when we had phones, turn the laptop off, be with your family, be with your friends, be on the beach, wherever you're doing, go and be gone. And, if there's something, of course, urgent, of course, you're going to check in on something. But for the most part, you need to compartmentalize things, and you need to be able to isolate when you have a family matter or an issue that needs its attention. You got to be there. You can't kind of be here with an elbow or a toe dipped in that pool.
Before we continue your career journey, one more bit on this topic, because it is a really hot topic, I think, right now, especially generationally. You touched on this a little bit yourself. I saw a meme just this morning. It was working long hours isn't the flex that you think it is. You exploited bleep. Uh, and that's a real growing perspective out there, especially around Gen Z, somewhat millennials, that you should work only as much as your job description says you should do. You should not color outside those lines because the company is exploiting you. If you do that, you're a sucker. And you should, even early in your career, clock in, clock out, do what you're paid to do, and nothing more. I'm curious, what your thoughts are on, you've been an exec, you've worked from the ground floor and moved your way up. What do you think about that trend? How do you think it's going to evolve at companies, knowing that some workers have that perspective?
First and foremost, I don't believe that whatsoever. So I think that's that almost is like a Gen Z driven comment, that you're just out to be exploited and everyone's out to take advantage of you. I don't think that's true at all. I think that has happened, absolutely, but I don't think that's kind of the emphasis of every company out there. It can happen if you allow it to. However, let me turn that around and say, what is my role as an employee? Forget who I work for, what industry I work in. My job, I believe directly, is I need to do the best possible job I can in that role. That's why I'm there. I'm there. If I'm there just to get a salary, sad. You're going to work, what, 8, 9, maybe 10 hours a day, 4 to 5 to 6 days a week. and all you're doing it for is just to get a check and walk away. This is why, the old saying, get a job you love and you won't never do work in your life. It's somewhat true. Sure, you're going to have ebbs and flows of working harder or not working harder, but if you don't like what you're doing, um, if you can, not everybody can, get out of that role. Get into something you enjoy, because you're going to enjoy coming to work. Now, when I enjoy coming to work, I'm going to want to do a good job. I believe I'm biblically, I'm driven. That's a mandate of me, that I need to do the best of whatever that is, whether I'm digging ditches or whether I'm managing 5,000 people. I got to do the best I possibly can. Now, does that mean that sometimes I'm going to work longer than 8 hours and 5 minutes? Yeah. Does it mean some days I'm going to have to log in at 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night to go check an email or put a presentation together that I'm doing the next day because I want to do a good job? Absolutely. Is that being exploited, or is that trying to do a good job? I think they're very different.
Yeah, it sounds like for you, part of what is fulfilling is doing good work, and it's not just about the paycheck. And yeah, I think that's not everyone's point of view, and I think that people's relationship with work certainly has changed with the pandemic. But I think that's going to be a fascinating evolution to watch. So let's continue down your path here. So you eventually, after 19 years, did leave Sun and went to Adobe. What eventually got you to make the jump?
I think the company had gone through a lot of challenges. In 2008, we had a big, no, excuse me, in 2000, we had the dot-com bust. When that hit 2001ish, I think it was. That kind of hit the bubble, and right at that time frame, that the company kind of did a dip actually in the mid 90s, and then another one around 2000. And then I left in 2006. About 2001, 2002, we had another hiccup. Um, and really, after that second hiccup, it was challenging. We started coming back, um, but you could see that the trend line of where the impact that Linux was having on large scale systems, and the commoditization of hardware. And at the end of the day, I was the software guy in a hardware company. Like Cisco. The Cisco likes to say they're really software company. They're still a hardware company. Sun was a hardware company at the end of the day, and I was the guy running software. And software was valued as long as the hardware was being accelerated and being promoted and successful. So at the end of the day, to me, it was like I really saw software was the trend and hardware was not. And so when I got a call to go speak with the folks at Adobe and go talk to Shantanu to go run Creative Suite, it was something that I think the second thing that was a driving factor was I'd always work with things like, oh, what do you do? I work for some Microsoft. Oh, really? What do they? I build operating systems and management software and development tools for the Unix operating system. What's that? Okay, and then let me explain what a server is. A server is a large-scale box that sits in a back room, and the internet runs on it. Oh, it runs the internet. Oh, I know what that is. Really hard to explain to general public or friends and family what you do. Versus, hi, we make Photoshop. I can take your head and put it on his body. Oh, I know what that is. I've seen that before. So
Yes.
it was very tangible, much more tapped into my creative side, which was harder to do in a management role at Sun than it was at Adobe.
Yeah, and that was so taking on Adobe, that was a multi-billion dollar business at that point, am I right? Do you know?
Uh, about a billion and a half to two, but I left it was about 2 billion.
Yeah, so very, very large business that you were taking on. You spent about 5, 6 years there, and one of the things that I remember about you, there's 2 things, there's a lot more than 2, but there's 2 things that I personally remember. So one, you culture was pretty important to you. I remember that you really tried to create a sense of what it was like to work there. I think you built a really strong leadership team, and the Dave Stories and Bill Henslers and those folks alike. I have to pull it out. I think I've got it here somewhere. You used to give out awards. I have one here. This is a Crazy Ivan award, I believe. I think it was for, I don't know what project I was working on that you gave me this for, but
Hmm.
invested in ways that I hadn't seen other leaders invest in culture. And I'm kind of curious where that comes from.
Um, Again, at the end of the day, it goes back to that line I gave you a while ago, which was at the end of the day, you work for people. You don't work for a company, and you will stay or leave that place based on your experience with those people. Um, there are some jobs, and maybe you're a salesperson that's never interacts with anybody else in the company for the most part, except your sales manager, and you're out, talking to customers every day, and you get a paycheck because you did really good at sales, and you can exist that way, and that can happen. But for the most part, you're in a collaborative environment that takes other people around you to get your job done. And if that's the case, then if you like working with those people, you'll stay. And if you don't, you won't. So creating a culture where you have collaboration and creativity that kind of happens in teams. How do you foster that? Well, how do you get people to want to work with each other? And that's not an easy thing to do, frankly, on a sustained basis. You can do it short term, but on a sustained basis, that's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It definitely was. It was appreciated by the rank and file, like I was at that time. And the other thing that I recall, you may or may not, you and I were having breakfast, lunch, something in Seattle in the cafeteria, and I think I had just been promoted to director or something along those lines. And you made a comment that your your favorite work that you did was as an individual contributor, when you were actually solving problems and building the product, and you miss those days a little bit. And I'm curious if you remember that conversation, remember that concept, and more importantly, do you remember that notion? Like, do you look back and feel like that was your favorite time, was when you were doing IC work? Because I talk to people all the time, coaching clients, other folks that are trying to make the decision about, should I become a manager or should I stay in IC? And there's some companies that are really trying to go hard into IC culture. You can be as high in the organization as you want as an IC. You don't have to be a
Hmm.
manager anymore. So I'm kind of
Hmm.
curious if that was a key decision, if you look back on one way or the other.
Lot to unpeel there. So I'll try to be brief, and if I get too long, just cut me off. Yes, I'll tell you the final part of that story is that when I left high tech after 35 years, I went back into a role. The role I'm doing now is I can buy real estate and then fix it up and sell it, right? Or rent it or whatever I'm going to do with it. But I do the work myself. And I tell people when I was in high tech as a manager of a large organization, you could work 6 months or a year and look back and go, okay, what did we get done? Whereas I work a day and I remove a wall of sheetrock and I put some wiring in the wall or plumbing in the wall. And after 8 hours, I look back and go, wow, there used to be a sheetrock wall there. Now it's studs and wires pulling through it and 14 outlets. I got something done today. And that tangible aspect of actually being a contributor and showing progress on a short-term basis is rewarding. And I went back to that somewhat. So yes, I believe that was important for me, not for everyone. There's other people. I love management. I love the fact of getting teams of people together, getting the whole team to come up and produce something. That also is a sense of accomplishment that, wow, I got this group of people who didn't know each other or work with each other to come together to get to a concept and then deliver that concept. That's rewarding too. Um, so it's not all one way or the other. I will say that I do very much enjoy being a contributor where I can see the impact of my work in a relatively short period of time versus the higher you move up in organizations and the higher you move up in management, it just takes a lot longer to get a payback from your time and investment, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Now, you eventually left Adobe and worked at a venture capital firm as a partner there, and then became a founder yourself and CEO for multiple company, that company and another. Um, what was that like for you? What was the difference for you in being CEO and founder versus being a senior executive for somebody else's company?
I was terrifying. And for those who go, hey, I want to leave and do my own thing, and I saw, Bob and Sue and Wendy went off and did this fire, and they became multimillionaire. it ain't for the faint of heart. Let me tell you right now. And what I thought what it's like to be a CEO of a startup. And my first one, I went to the venture firm not with the intent of becoming a full-time venture partner over years, but with the intent of the venture company was going to invest in whatever thing I picked out. So at that time, what we did was they said, okay, we have money earmarked. You come in and tell us what the idea is, and we'll invest in that idea based on my just track record as an executive. And so my first role was to help them with some other investments and then jump into picking one thing. And again, I was trying to be okay. I'm going to go pick something in, video, multimedia, a web-based application, something that was in my Adobe background. And I ended up going into network monitoring, which is the most geeky, high-tech niche thing I could possibly imagine, because I felt I could differentiate and stand out sooner than trying to be one of the 30 people in the spaces that I was identifying that everyone else was in. So it was terrifying because becoming CEO, I was employee number one. I had to hire employee number 2, 3, 4, and 5. I was both the CEO. I was also the CFO. I was also the head of HR. I was also the raising capital. I was also, you have to do everything when you start. And I found a co-founder, the guy, brilliant technical person, guy got his PhD from Stanford in like a year and a half or something. It was at the time, it was like the fastest time someone had actually done that. Just a brilliant, brilliant guy. And it was in this niche area called, technical network monitoring, which is minutia detail down to the, nanosecond level monitoring of what's happening over a network to tell if something was either going to go bad or was predicted to go bad. And so this is prior to AI being popular, so we couldn't use all those techniques that people were using that they're using now. But in any event, all that said, it was wearing multiple hats. The other difference is that if you failed at Adobe or you failed at Sun or a company of that size, there were so many checks and balances in place to make sure that you couldn't get off the rails too far, right? That your HR person or your finance person or your legal person would be hey, wait a minute, John's doing something stupid. Let's go let people know about this. And you could get a little bit off and make a bad mistake, but you're not going to make it twice or three times. Certainly not at Adobe. Shawnee runs too tight of a ship. In a startup, every decision is monumental because it can shape. Now, doesn't mean the good news about a startup is if you make a mistake today, tomorrow you can be a different company, right? You can just shift and do something totally different the next day because you only got 3 employees. But every decision you make is monumental to that particular circumstance. So all of a sudden now, whether you were raising money in the pitch you were making, whether you were hiring somebody that you thought was going to be good or bad, whether you were actually picking the product line or direction you wanted to take or marketing strategy or sales strategy, everything was on your shoulders. So it was terrifying and challenging. It was one of the 5 hardest years of my life, was that 5 years or 6 years, getting that startup to go to the point where getting our first customer, getting revenue, and then actually getting an offer to sell the company.
Well, congratulations on that. Not everybody gets to have that experience, and not everybody wants that experience, but it sounds like a pretty tumultuous, but also pretty rewarding opportunity that you went through. So, John, I'm going to rapid fire a few questions as we kind of wrap here toward the end.
Okay.
These are reflective on, a long career that you've had. So I'm curious, is there a piece of feedback or that you received during your career that was maybe the best or that stood out to you the most that helped change and helped you grow?
For me, it was don't take yourself too seriously. Too many people I see, young people I see today, that are just so hardwired into kind of, they identify their self-worth with their job. And that's a sad state. As someone who's been around the block, who's lived a little, as they say, to think back and think that your work is the only thing that defines you would be a sad state. If work is the only thing that defines you, my recommendation, and don't take this wrong, go get a life. You need to get outside of work a little bit and develop some things around you. What do your friends think of you? And this is a line I'll bring up, and I don't want to get too deep here, but I've given, I think, 8 eulogies in my life. People have asked me to speak at family or friends' funerals 8 times. In the 8 times I've done a eulogy, no one around me has ever said, Joe just wishes he'd worked a little bit harder when at his job, before he died, or Wendy wished that she closed that one more deal, or traveled one more time, and was away from her family one more week because she really missed that. I do hear people say, Bob just wished he had more time with his family, spent more time with his friends, spent more time traveling. So this is where I've learned something from the Gen Z crowd, right? Which is work isn't everything. It's important. It's vitally important, especially for what's going to happen to you and your kids down the road as you think ahead. But it's not everything. And I would think it'd be sad for people to be defined just by their work.
What of all the things that you've done in your career are you most proud of?
The fact that I had a relatively a positive experience with my career, um, but was able to maintain, I think, a good work-life balance with my family. That's the thing I'm proud of, is that I was able to maintain my family structure, stability, um, over long duration, and still have a career at the same time. It wasn't about the career; it was about what's outside the career that was able to manage both.
Is there anything that you do differently?
I would have been taller and weighed less and better looking. Um, that would have been the top thing. Other than that, I think the things I would have done differently um, is I probably would have gotten a technical degree with a business or marketing minor. I think the combination of technical with marketing sales is like that's the epiphany of what would be a great experience, is someone who has the ability to understand the underpinnings of how things actually work and are built, along with understanding how they're actually used and who uses them. That combination, I found those people like you are people who I think are the most valuable in organizations, the ones who can span those 2 areas. And I wish I would have done more of that sooner.
Well, it's remarkable to have the career you have and have few regrets. I think that's a life well lived. I hope you feel that way. I'm curious. One last question here, and this is more projecting out for people that are just entering the workforce in the middle of their careers, and we're in a period right now where you've got AI evolving. That's the next disruption and trend that's both creating jobs and eliminating jobs. You've got a
Mhm.
lot of tech companies laying off, cutting back workforce. Some of the most luxurious benefits have started to get pulled back. It's not quite what it was in the .com or even in the last decade. What advice, if any, would you give to people that are interested in entering tech? What parts of tech do you think have the best opportunity? What types of jobs, functions, or careers do you think are most interesting or potentially growth areas that people could explore or spend some time on?
It's a great question. I'm probably if you're out of something for just a couple of years, it's amazing how fast things are moving. When I was leaving tech, I mean, AI was just picking up. We were looking at AI companies to acquire, but now it's like the centerpiece of technology for the most part. Um, with the amount of people coming into tech that have technical degrees, with the amount of people just coming in because it's a large industry, certainly here in the Valley it is, and I think obviously globally it is. Um, to me, it's similar to when I was getting in the industry. Was how do you differentiate? Okay, so you're technical. So what? So are 50 other people that submitted resumes right next to you. How do you stand out? And this goes to my marketing angle of, so if you submit a resume Okay, what about it that you got a degree from MIT? Great. Wow, that's a great school. So what? Now what? What's going to make you stand out from the guy who came from Harvard and Yale and Princeton? What, or for that matter, from Chico State? What's going to make you stand out from those people? Is it internships you did? Is it practical things you've done on the side? Is it additional things that you have to bring to the table? Like, oh, by the way, you got an MBA in addition to your technical degree. So what is it that's going to make you stand out? Because right now, it's a mature industry, meaning there's a lot of people who've been around for a long time in and around technology. So just to come up with a flashy resume, or you came from a good company, you came from Google. I know a lot of my kids' friends who are Google employees or former Google employees who are struggling finding their next job because the market is tight right now. So you've got to stand out, and it's really hard to do. But putting my marketing hat on again, it's what are you going to do to differentiate yourself from the guy next to you? You've got to stand out somehow. And whether that's a skill set or a personality or being dogmatic, boy, effort is 60% of it, right? The guys who badgered me to get that meeting to be a mentor for them, those are the ones I wanted to mentor, not the ones who asked me once and then went away. I never saw them again.
Well, valuable advice, and I really appreciate you taking an hour away from erecting the next house that you're building or renovating. It was really great to see you again, Johnny. So I'm happy to see that it seems like things have gone well in the time since we've seen each other, and I'm happy to hear your family's doing well too.
Well, great. Thanks, Brian. Great to hear about you and your family as well. And take care, and best of luck to you.
All right. Thanks, Johnny. That's JohnnyL, John Loiacono, and maybe can't find him for work right now unless you're planning to lay some sheetrock. So we'll connect you with John if you want that kind of work, which is, as John said, a pretty tangible and rewarding way to spend your day. Until our next episode, this is Brian Nemhauser. You can find me at WorkDad.io, WorkDad.io on TikTok and Instagram, and Work-Dad on YouTube. Take care. See you soon.